Anthropic just dropped routines inside of Claude Code, which means now your automations can run 24/7. Scheduled agents, API triggers, webhooks, everything without your laptop even needing to be on because it's all running off of their own servers. So this is what it looks like. We have our routines here, and I actually set this one up already, Gmail Cooker. And what this does is it reads my inbox every morning and writes draft replies for every email while I'm sleeping. So if we click into it, when it runs, you can actually see each step broken down. But instead of you having to constantly prompt it and approve things like you have to in Claude Code, instead it just says, look, I'll start by loading the Gmail tools and check your unread emails. And if you haven't already caught on to my prompt, I asked it to create the most disrespectful, rude, funny, and unhinged replies you can possibly think of, and then save them as a draft directly in my Gmail. And then once everything's done, send me a review. And then if we scroll down, we can actually see the drafts here. Let's actually open these up. It made this draft for a Google security alert. It said, oh, so now you're telling me after the fact, hey, a new sign-in happened on a Mac. Google, you literally have access to everything about my life. You're the one with the most satellites. This is the most powerless security alert I've ever received. And then it saved all the messages that it prepared in my drafts. So before we go through the exact step-by-step breakdown in this full setup process, I want to give you a bit of context. So what is a routine? Well, a routine is just a prompt that runs on its own. We just send a message to Claude Code the same as we normally would. And because we're configuring all of our connections, like connections to Gmail or Stripe or Slack or whatever service that you're using, once it's connected to those tools, all you have to do is send a message and it goes and does it. Once you've connected those tools, whatever you want it to do, you just send a simple prompt and then it just goes off and does it. And this is really what we've been waiting for, right? Because now we don't have to go into Claude Code and constantly send messages every single time we want to do something. We can have it run on a schedule, hourly, daily, weekdays, or you could even set it up with something like an API call or a webhook. You can also trigger it from a different tool. So if a lead comes in through your pipeline, we can just have a simple, like a webhook trigger event come through immediately to Claude Code, and then it knows to start whatever task that you had set it up for. And a big thing here is it's running on Anthropic servers. So it's not your computer's local host or your server. Everything's on Anthropic servers, which makes it so much faster. So it's not like you need to leave your computer on overnight if you want a task to be done. So why does any of this matter? Well, what we used to do is use something like make.com or N8N, where you have these node-based automation builders where you're physically dragging node to node and you're going to have link breaks, right? Things are going to break. Things are just going to happen. But in the old days, which now with AI, that was like last month, you had to go in and actually manually fix those specific pieces of your automation. If something broke, you had to go in and fix it yourself and do all the error testing and everything yourself. So everything was manual. You had to go in and set up the credentials. And yeah, even if you set it up once, you still had to go in and select Gmail and Google Sheets and figure out which column you wanted and map everything over. And oh, this isn't coming out back correctly. So now we have errors, a complete headache. And a server has to stay running the entire time. And as I mentioned, the worst of all, it breaks and you have no idea why. It would run 3, 4, or 5 times perfectly. But on the most important day when the client needed something, it just wouldn't run. And you'd just be sitting there staring at the screen for 10 hours trying to figure this out without Claude Code. But now we just write a simple prompt in plain English. We say, hey, go connect these over here for me. Yeah, great. 30 seconds. All right, buddy, look, I'll give you 10 seconds to do this. With N8N, it was like, you're going to be sitting there for at least an hour or two, even for the smallest tasks. Connecting your accounts is once. You just connect the accounts once, and that's it. They're there forever. It runs on Anthropic's cloud, as we spoke about. Also, it self-corrects when something breaks. So it's not being a detective, Mr. Einstein over here with the magnifying glass, looking around for what broke for 4 hours. Meanwhile, you're pulling your hair out. It self-corrects because it's constantly going to be looking and iterating and, oh, okay, I see this is a problem. And hey, if there's a problem that it can't fix on its own, guess what you do? You send one message and say, hey, fix this for me. Boom, done, analyzed, solved. The only real limitation with routines is if the tool you want to use doesn't have an API. Like if you need Claude to log into a website and click around, that won't work. Every run technically starts completely fresh for now, which I'm sure will change pretty soon. But as long as your goal is to use something that has API access, then you'll be fine. So go to your Claude settings. It's claude.ai/settings. And then we're going to scroll down to connectors. So there's two types of connectors. You have the pre-built ones right here. And if we click on browse connectors, we can see all these different options. So we can search up Stripe or Slack, a bunch of different options, just like a catalog in something like N8N, where it's giving us all these different options for nodes and tools that we can connect. 99% of people watching this, everything in here will be perfectly fine for what you need. However, there is a second option, which is the custom connector, where you put your remote MCP URL. This is where you'd add those connectors that are not currently in the catalog. These tools will have their own MCP server server, and I'm not going to get into that right now. If you just take a screenshot of this, send it to Claude, say, hey, this is the tool I'm trying to connect. What do I do? It'll tell you how to connect that. And you'll grab these in the settings, normally in the API section of whatever that tool is. And we're going to be building the exact same inbox drafter because I think it's pretty cool and probably the most useful. So click on Gmail to configure. And by the way, you're going to want to connect to your GitHub. If you don't have a GitHub, just go ahead and create one. It takes 2 seconds. Create a GitHub repository. And the reason why we would do that is to put our Claude.md file in there. And all that is just going to give it a brief description about everything about you, your business, context, the way you speak, your voice. So if we're applying to customers, then it obviously is going to need a bit of information. If you say, hey, refer to the Claude.md or customer support.md file that I have, and all that is just text uploaded. Again, use Claude to make it. But if we put that in there, then it's only going to refer to that information when it needs to go find answers. And that's how we can instruct it and test and so on. But Claude right now is at a point where it's very good about that, going and finding contextually relevant information and then being able to reply to people correctly. So we'll just configure our Gmail. And again, as soon as you click on connect, it's just going to take you to this page to log into your Gmail, and then it's connected. And if we click on configure here, we have to make sure that we give permission and allow it to do these things, right? Like create a new label, create a new draft email in the authenticated user's email account. So make sure these are all to always allow. Otherwise, you can do needs approval or blocked. Let's actually do that right now. So I'm going to show you how to connect to GitHub. I'm just going to click on connect, and now we're going to log in with our Gmail. Okay, so now we're connected. Let's go back to routine. So now if we click on select repository, let's use Eruption Hot Sauce. So we selected the repository Eruption Hot Sauce, our hot sauce brand for today. And now we're just going to ask Claude, generate me a Claude.md file all about my fake brand called Eruption Hot Sauce. Be extremely detailed. And by the way, our tone is a bit more rough around the edges and to the point. Fully develop any of the rest of the questions that you might ask me and just go ahead and develop the answers for them. Okay, so now it generated that for us. We have our who we are, brand voice and tone, what we sound like. This one's not for the weak, brother. We don't do mild, don't ask, eruption original, magma, ash. All right. Yeah, so it went extremely in detail. We even have our visual identity. Let's download this. We're going to name this Eruption Brand. Okay, eruptionbrand.mb. Let's go over to GitHub. Let's log in. And not that it really matters where we put this, but we're in the main root. This little drop down here. If you're not familiar with GitHub, if it says main, you're in the right place. Click on add file, create new file, and paste it in. Okay, and now the file is going to be named eruptionmd. Commit changes. Okay, so we have eruptionmd. If we go back over to actually create a routine, click on routine, new routine, and now we'll just give it a name like Gmail hot sauce. And then here's where we simply put in our prompt for exactly what we want it to do. So I'll just say, create a simple customer support agent for my hot sauce company. I attached my GitHub repository with the file name eruptionmd in the GitHub that I connected. Use that as reference for what my brand is about and how you should be replying to these customers. Now we can just select the repository as Eruption Hot Sauce. And don't worry about these environments over here. I'm going to show you what to do with that in a second. And this is where we select our triggers. We have a schedule trigger, which allows us to set it up daily, hourly, weekly, however you want to do it. We also have a GitHub event where you can make it so that once a webhook event triggers or once some kind of information is retrieved through the GitHub, then it'll actually start. And then we have an API trigger. And an API trigger means that any tool can fire this routine automatically. So if a lead comes in or a form gets submitted, it'll trigger this and cause it to start. And then of course we have our connectors and permissions. And the beauty is it's Claude. If you have a problem or any issues setting this up, you simply tell it what you want built and it'll instruct you A to Z exactly what to do. And then you'll click create and now it's done. However, let's actually change some things around. I'd select the schedule or whatever the trigger is, and then I click create and then you'd see the exact same example as we did on part one. But let's take it a step further. So like I said, I was going to explain to you guys these cloud environments. All that is it's essentially like a set of settings or the credentials that it has access to. The difference here with connectors are more like pre-built integrations where Claude can actually read and write to the tool. If it has access to our Gmail, it can actually make a draft. There's full two-way access through the OAuth authentication. And the way we decide between a connector or something that would require being put in the environment file, it's really simple. Click on browse connectors and we're going to type in YouTube. Let's say I want to fetch some YouTube data. Well, guess what? No connectors match your search. Now we're connecting a YouTube data fetcher. So how do we actually go get that API key? If you go back over to Google If you go to the Google Cloud Console, and we create a new project, and we come over here to these three lines, and we go over to APIs, credentials. We're going to grab this key from our project, come back over to Claude, create a routine to fetch my YouTube comments, and then send me a summary of how people feel about my videos and what things I can improve on. Here's my API key. Now, by giving it the API key, it's automatically going to remember going forward, which is extremely powerful because if I ever need to do anything with YouTube ever again, it'll remember the key. So I just click create. And to test, this is obviously an extremely simple example. We'll just click run now. And if we click into the run now, you can see it doing step by step. I gave it some clarification, letting it know that's my credential for YouTube. And now it says, got it, I'll wire it in. Let me build everything now. So I asked it to make a quick summary and it did. Now, one note I will say is whenever you're connecting these, you can't necessarily do the full capabilities to something like you would do with N8N, right? So with Gmail, for example, it can only do what it's limited to do, specifically according to Claude. It can't send messages to Gmail right now that we can do in something like N8N currently. So there are some limitations in specific use cases, but that doesn't mean that you can't connect something to Slack, for example, Telegram, and have a message with whatever information that you want sent to you immediately every single morning. If you're serious about learning AI automation, and more importantly, how to actually make money with automation and automate your content, leads, and ads, I'll leave a link to my paid community down in the description. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next one.